All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is pretty safe to say, with the release of characters like Zani, Phoebe, Kachona, as well as Arrow Rover and even Spectro Rover, which, you got for free, there are a lot of people talking a lot of stuff about the elemental system, the attribute system, debuffs like Frazzle, Erosion, and soon-to-be released ones, right? Like Glacial Chafe, Fusion Blast, all of that. And it's safe to say that the restrictions built into the system, the need to pair up certain characters with each other, that's something that's kind of tickling some players the wrong way. And so we've got a video over here by Lil Honey Schmack. Hopefully I'm saying it kind of reminds me of like Gotcha Smack for some odd reason. We got a video here by Lil Honey Schmack talking about why WuWa's elemental system sucks. And I'm gonna be real here. The fact that they only have 126 subscribers and were able to farm 5,000 views on what is essentially their first video ever that didn't do badly. Let's go ahead and see. They must be spitting.
Elements are pretty sick. And we all know it. The ability to manipulate the natural phenomena has been ingrained into our brains since we were kids watching Avatar, or hell, even Power Rangers or Pokemon. And we eat that shit up. And the companies know that. There's Pokemon, Digimon, Beyblade, Avatar, Power Rangers, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Magic, Naruto, Fairy Tail, Bleach, Elden Ring, League of Legends, Star Rail, Genshin, Tower of...
Damn, bro's got the references. Damn, bro's played a lot of games. He's played a lot of content.
We don't talk about that one. The point is, the ability to manipulate elements is a staple to any form of media if you even slightly dabble in fantasy action. And Wuthering Waves is no exception. We have Gion with his Wind Dragon. We have Jinxie with her Light Dragon. We have the Electric Shangri-La with these hands and
They're cubes, okay? They're called hypercubes, bucko.
geometry, I guess. And it's all sick as fucking presentation.
True.
Like, who doesn't love the idea of literally blasting mobs in the face with a blicky, which then releases crystalline ice pellets? Or who doesn't literally like turning into a fire phoenix when fighting with Chang Li? Wuthering Waves has always excelled with presentation, and there's no qualms about that. The issue is that mechanically, the elements don't mean anything. See, back when WuWa first released, the elements were literally just an aesthetic to an extent.
Well, he's actually wrong there, because you know all of those debuffs that they were talking about? Spectro, Frazzle, Area Erosion, all of that stuff? Why do you think that when you fought the Morning Ikes in 1.0, you would take damage over time if it hit you? Yeah, remember when the Morning Ikes, if you got hit by its attacks, you would start taking damage over time? And people were wondering how they were getting, like, off-screen killed? Yeah, that's because the enemies actually had access to those debuffs.
The most integration it had with the combat was that if the enemy was the same type, they'd resist attacks from said type.
That is true.
Whenever TOA deemed that this type is good for the reset. Aside from that, elements didn't mean much other than letting you know that you're going to be using a character with these effects instead of that effect. This was definitely because Kuro Games wanted a piece of that Genshin slice, and this was one of the many things that Kuro added because Genshin had it. But besides that, it didn't do too much.
I don't think it's fair to say that an elemental system with type matching and type mismatching is something that Kuro added just because Genshin had it, because, well, I can just point you to an example of a game that did it like 20 fucking years ago. It's called Pokemon. Yeah, you guys remember types in Pokemon? How if you use a fire move against a fire Pokemon, it does less damage? Or if how you use a water move against a fire Pokemon, it does more damage? Yeah, I think we're going ahead. I think we're giving Genshin a little bit too much creative credit over here by saying that they invented a resistance system based off of elements. Yeah, that's just... Guys, that's a little bit disingenuous. I'm gonna have to call that out. I think the video's okay so far, but that is a pretty disingenuous thing to say. 1,000,000%.
And you know what? I like that. The elemental reactions from Genshin are cool in concept and can be fun to customize your gameplay.
I love how he showed Freeze, which is an example of an elemental reaction that's not actually usable against, like, the actual important enemies in the game. Like, you can't freeze bosses, And so, like, this reaction is literally one of the most useless ones in the game.
But after a while, it becomes a situation where if you didn't use this reaction, you're just wasting time.
True.
Genshin also had the system where if you had a certain combination of types on your team, you'd get passive buffs, which is cool again, but again, not the...
I don't think people recognize how absurdly restricting the system actually was. Where now it's like, oh, you might have a character kit that feels like really cool, but if you want to use that cool character's kit, you're going to end up with a useless fucking bonus. Like, let's just say you want to have 2 animo characters in your team because you really like the kit of a certain animo character. It's like, okay, great. Now I have this useless fucking team buff where I now have 10% increased movement speed and 5% skill cooldown instead of 25% attack. Where there are just some of these things over here that are so absurdly broken. Like, some of the elemental resonance things are so broken that it makes the other ones just completely dog-ass. And it forces a lot of certain team comps. Why do you think Bennett's just an automatic slot in for any, like, pyro team? Or any team with, like, 1 pyro unit? Because if you don't put him in, you're gonna miss, like, a fuck ton of attack on your team, and the DPS drops off a cliff. It makes certain characters so much more required than others. So many characters so much more required than others. Yeah, Hu Tao's probably the only pyro character where you don't want them. And maybe, I guess, like, Arlecchino too, right? Because they want the Hydro with HP. This looks outdated. I'm pretty sure the Hydro Resonance actually gives you more HP instead of more healing. I don't know what the fuck this is. But yeah, some of this stuff seems outdated. But yeah, this system ends up being way more restrictive than it is beneficial. And it makes certain characters mandatory in pretty much every comp if you don't want to grief your damage. And it makes some characters unusable because they grief your damage if you use them.
The most relevant. Especially in WuWa's setting, considering you're limited to 3 characters per team as opposed to 4, severely limiting the mechanic if it was implemented into WuWa. At that time, I didn't mind that it was mostly just a don't use this if it's the same situation. It was simple. It didn't make me use characters I didn't care for just to get synergistic stats.
You can still actually use characters with the resistance debuff. You just won't deal as much damage. In Genshin Impact, people are like just like gawk glazing this elemental system. You ever went against a Abyss Lector? Y'all ever know what it's like going against an Abyss Lector? Yeah, they basically are literally invulnerable. They're literally invulnerable unless you bring a certain element. Like, you just have to exit out. It's a hard lock unless you bring a certain type of character. You just literally cannot even deal damage to them. And that's what they have in their endgame. Versus, you can still bring who you want. You'll just do less damage. But at least you can do damage. And the only enemies in WuWa with full resistance are the fucking prisms. Like, the ads. They're literally just ads that are like, there's not a single boss in the game with full immunity. But Abyss Lectors, oh boy. Oh boy, actual nightmares if you don't have the right team. But if you do have the right team for an Abyss Lector, they're a fucking joke. They die immediately. There's almost no challenge at all in clearing them, as long as you're using the right units.
And honestly, it let me use my Wind Dragon and Flaming Bird in peace, and I was chill with that. Then 2.0 came out, and the elemental system went under a bit of a reconstruction. Sort of, not really though. I say that because in 2.0, Spectro Rover received a buff where he would now be able to apply Spectro Frazzle, a DOT effect, or damage over time.
And it was just a straight buff, right? They lost no other power in their kit. They simply just gained synergy with the new Sonata set. And now I think they're one of the most, at least with the release of other new characters, they're one of the most competitive units in the game.
They soon revealed that every element would be receiving some kind of secondary effect. Arrow getting Arrow Erosion, Havoc getting Havoc Bane, and so on and so forth. For the most part, we had already seen these debuffs, but they were done to us. The Monkey would apply Arrow Erosion onto us, Inferno Rider would apply Burn to us, and we'd get frozen by the Lampy, whatever the fuck its name is, when we got hit enough. 2.0 enabled us to access these debuffs, which would be cool if majority of them didn't fucking suck.
I think it's fair to say Spectro Frazzle doesn't do that much damage.
Maybe I'm exaggerating a bit, but I really don't like how they implemented a lot of these elemental reactions. For one, most of these are literally just DOTs that aren't actually significant. Spectral Frazzle DOT is barely noticeable, only being used as a requirement for Phoebe's damage amp, and soon to be Zani's. Arrow Erosion is just another form of ticking damage. Molten Rift is a burst of damage when you hit them enough. And they're all just underwhelming.
I mean, let's be honest here. Let's be entirely honest here. If we're gonna have this much of a critique of WuWa's elemental system, do you know what Genshin's elemental system is?
If you're the Pyro character and you hit something with Hydro on it, you deal more damage. The attack deals more damage. If you're the Pyro character and you hit something with the Cryo on it, your attack deals more damage. If you're the Electro character and you hit something with Hydro on it, you inflict a DOT. And then if you put Dendro and Hydro and Electro, you automatically win the game. You just deal a fuck ton of damage. Even though nobody on your team is actually built for damage.
So it's like, yeah, you could say that like Genshin's is equally like as ridiculously simple. It's just we only have 2 of the DOTs in the game currently, if we're gonna go that far, and unfortunately 2 of them do appear to be just damage over time effects, but it's not like adding an amplifying bonus to the attack is that much more crazy. It's in fact, it's just amplifying one source of damage when you're doing like a vape or a cryo, or a vape or a melt. So, I mean, I'm gonna be real here. I don't think that's that much more crazy. And then Hyper Bloom is its own fucking disaster by itself.
In sound, we haven't seen majority of these effects yet, so maybe I'm underestimating.
The DOT system isn't supposed to be the main way to deal damage. Yeah, this is the thing. Guess what happens in Genshin Impact? Yeah, if you don't use the elemental reactions, your team is actually not playable. I feel like that's the thing that people don't realize, is that if you're not using elemental reactions, your team is just useless. It's awful. It's terrible. Completely trash. Super restrictive for team building in the long run. You want to use your Pyro DPS? You better make sure you have a Cryo or a Hydro character on there. Otherwise, they literally cannot be used.
The only one that sounds mildly interesting is Havoc Bane, where it spreads like a virus. That's a cool mechanic. But again, all of them just being a dot kind of makes them feel boring, not special, lacking.
Fusion Burst is a stack that ticks up and then deals damage. Havoc Bane is also a stack that builds up and deals damage, and then Glacial Che freezes. So yeah, no, they're not all dots. I think it's a little bit much to say that they're all just dots.
Uniqueness? I don't know, it all just feels repetitive. Again, I might sound hella pessimistic for a system that isn't even fully implemented yet. And who knows, maybe all these mechanics will be interesting and more impactful than they sound. But just their impact aren't the only issues I have with it. See, a lot of these elements seem to be supplemental to characters with specific passives. For example, Phoebe does shit damage without Frazzle. I love her, she's great, but if you don't have any Frazzle on the enemy you're fighting, you're literally useless. Arrow Rover is just an erosion buffer for probably Chikona, who's gonna have some sort of interaction with Arrow Erosion.
It's true, she does. Kachona has an outro skill that buffs arrow erosion damage by 100%, and she applies a fuck ton of arrow erosion across her rotation, and can basically maintain uptime on arrow erosion almost permanently during the fight, at its max stacks. So yeah, the synergy is 100% there.
Probably Cartethio, whenever she comes out and we get to see her kid. The elemental debuffs themselves aren't important in the grand scheme of things, which kinda sucks. They just add a layer and an excuse to add more multipliers to characters that are coming out.
Well, it's a different way of dealing damage. And this is the thing, right? You can say that having elemental debuffs, which is, I guess, like Arrow Erosion and Spectral Frazzle in the game, isn't inherently good. Because it's just not really that crazy of a way to deal damage. But guess what, guys? You literally are just given options at this point. Let's be real. You don't need to pull Zani or Phoebe or use Spectro Rover at all if you just have the Jinsei team, which is focused on no elemental debuffs at all, and it just deals raw damage. If you have Gion and Mortify, which you're basically guaranteed to have Mortify at this point. You can just focus on dealing pure raw arrow damage, or you can decide to deal your arrow damage through erosion. This is just giving you options on how to deal damage with the team and isn't requiring you to pull characters to have like elemental coverage. You don't have to play the dot team. You don't have to play the dot team in any circumstance. You don't have to play the Frazzle team. You don't have to play the erosion team. You're just simply given two options for how you want to approach the damage, at least at this point. And is that the worst thing ever? Especially when it's pretty clear that the power creep numbers, despite what you might be hearing from other CCs based off their impossible to perform rotations, the power creep numbers aren't actually there, where you're not going to have a meaningful difference between using your Jinsei Cantarella team and then your Zani Phoebe team in endgame. You're probably not going to have a meaningful difference between your Arrow Erosion team and then your Jian team in the endgame. And I'm pretty sure, right, when the Electro debuff comes out, you're not going to have a meaningful difference between the Zhang Liao and Yinlin team and the Electro Flare team. Same with the Fusion Burst team, where you're using Brant and Chang Li as the opposing sides. It's just a different way to play the game. And if you decide that's something you like, where you like being able to deal damage over time, you like these mechanics, then pull them and go for it. But your hand isn't being forced like it is in Genshin Impact, where you have to pull for elemental reactions, or else you just don't do anything with the character. Y'all ever played Hu Tao without a Jing Cho or a Yalad on the team? Oh, fuck me. That's awful. That's just not good. And yes, I know she has a plunge team, but that's pulling two limited characters to play her in a plunge team, right? Versus pulling a one Yelan or using your free Xingqiu. So yeah, there's a difference over there. And so people kind of like doom posting on this whole elemental debuff team situation is like, I could understand if that was the only way to play the element. But when you have all of these other alternatives that just deal damage in a traditional way, and the elements are just an additional option, I can't really see what the issue really is.
I think it'd be cool if different characters had different interactions with these debuffs, but at this point, it just seems like if you have the debuff on, the character's gonna do more damage. And that shouldn't be the only reason why you apply the debuffs. It once again makes it feel pointless and kinda lazy. And finally, the thing that really pisses me off.
Because they don't probably want to do a lot of rebalancing of older units to ensure that, like, okay, because you want to know what Genshin has to do when every new character releases? They have to make sure that whenever they release a new Hydro character, it's not going to be broken with any other Pyro character on the roster. Whenever they release a new Cryo character, they have to make sure it's not going to overtune every other, like, Hydro or every other Pyro character on the roster. Because of how interwoven every single unit is together, because of the elemental system, they have to balance DPSs around Bennett existing in the game. Or maybe they just stopped balancing, right? Because obviously Silali and Mavuika came out, so I guess they decided to stop trying. And you know what that's led to? When the devs stopped trying against Genshin Impact? An immense amount of fucking power creep. Like with the Mavuika and Silali team. Because I guess the devs were just like, fuck, this elemental reaction system has just completely drove us into a fucking hole. Fuck it. Just take the limiters off. Who cares? And now every single character after Mavuika has been an insane amount of damage creep over every other team that's existed before. Good stuff.
Not every character can even apply these debuffs. When they introduced the mechanic, I assumed that they would retroactively buff all the characters so that they could apply their respective elemental debuffs.
I think that the only characters that need some of these elemental debuffs added to them are some of the lesser used units. Characters like Alto, characters like John Shin, characters like Yan Wu. Those are ones that I believe are like prime. Maybe even Yinlin too, to be honest, because Yinlin is kind of losing some steam. I could see a lot of those characters going ahead and getting some elemental debuffs added on into their kit to give them more use cases, to give them more viability, to give them more synergy with maybe some new characters coming out to increase their use cases. But a character like Jinsei, no, Jinsei does not need to apply Spectro Frazzle because she's already like a complete unit. She feels perfectly fine. You don't need her to be the best team in all of the content in the game. Similarly, I don't think Jian needs Arrow Erosion because bro still goes ahead and has so much unique stuff in his kit and still does a shit ton of damage when played properly. Character like Brant or Chang Li, I don't think they need Fusion Burst. And so it's about, in my opinion, not adding it to every single unit, but adding it to the ones that maybe people aren't playing that often.
And that's what happened with Spectro Rover. When I heard that the Frost debuff would slow enemies and at some point freeze them, you wanna know what the first thing I thought of was? Ling Yang. Everyone's biggest complaint with him was that his attacks took too long to get his full damage off, and enemies would be moving around too much for him to maximize his on-field time.
Yeah, what I'm seeing over here is just kind of like what I'm saying, where you do want, again, the older unused characters to get something to sweeten up the dish for them.
Him being able to apply a slow with how many hits he does could have been huge, and honestly skyrocketed him in tier lists. And it's not like it's not possible, they literally buffed Spectro Rover because of this system.
I don't think it's gonna bump him, just apply a freeze. Yeah, I'm pretty sure Carlotta could just not have her freeze in her kit and she would still be top tier. It's because of the damage that Carlotta deals. I don't think this is going to change his damage at all.
Let Encore apply Molten Debuff. Let Verena apply Spectro Frazzle.
And for the love of God, let Arrow Rover up.
Verena applying Spectro Frazzle would be interesting. I'm not sure how balanced it would be, because having it on a healer role is a little bit nuts.
Okay, I'm calm, I'm okay.
The Arrow Rover one I can see though. Yeah, the fact that Arrow Rover can't apply their own erosion without another debuff applier on the team is a little, yeah.
Anyway, I have some suggestions. Again, take this with a grain of salt because I don't know how fully interesting this system is.
Isn't that too much for Verena? Spectro Frazzle, healing, coordinated attack, universal damage buffs. That's attack buffs as well. That's kind of a lot in one unit. Yeah, I feel like that would be kind of a lot for one unit for them to have coordinated attacks, Spectro Frazzle, attack buffs, universal damage buff, the fastest rotation in the game, healing. I mean, I understand we want standard units to be powerful, but like there has to be a power budget somewhere, because I think that would make her better than a lot of limited units.
As yet, it's just on paper, and on paper it sounds lackluster, and these are things I'd like to see to spruce it up. On paper. First things first, let all the characters apply their debuffs. There's no reason for only specific characters to be able to apply it and then also have specific characters have specific benefits from them.
That would make the game seem a little bit too homogeneous. If every single character can apply debuffs and you also in the same breath don't want any character to gain benefits from debuffs. Because now what that's going to be is just, it's just, yeah, you could, I don't know about that one. That would just make it, that would just remove all depth at all from the system and not add any differentiation between the teams.
It's an excuse to sell characters and be lazy with kit development.
Wouldn't it be lazier to just give the debuffs to everybody at the same time and then not have benefits? That would involve removing lines from the kits. Like what you're suggesting would remove lines from the characters' kits. And so wouldn't that literally take less effort to do? That's just what I'm thinking.
It limits team building and incentivizes pulling for characters based on utility, disregarding if they even want the character.
I can somewhat see the argument over here in that, oh, I want to play Zani, but I don't want Phoebe. But I can't be strong with Zani unless I pull Phoebe. I guess that's a fair take to make. But it's also like, I want to play Carlotta, but I don't want Jeja. And so I will simply deal less damage with my Carlotta team as long as I'm not willing to pull Jeja. So it's kind of just like, unless you want the characters to be absolutely 1,000,000% self-sufficient by themselves and not gain any buffs at all, you are always going to be in a situation where your character will deal less damage unless you pull their best in slot buffer. That's the case for every unit in the game. You will always have this conundrum of, what if I don't want to pull or play this unit that buffs them? What if I want to play Jian, but I don't want to play Mortifi? What if I want to play Jinxie, but I don't like using coordinated attackers? Then yeah, my DPS is going to suffer. I can still do it. And so the conundrum really is that you can definitely play Zani without Phoebe. The team will just do less damage. I'm pretty sure you'll be able to play Kachona without Arrow Rover. The team will just deal less damage. So the conundrum is, it's not like you can't play the team. You'll simply just deal less damage with the team unless you start pairing some of the units that pair better with each other. But a kit being restricted by a debuff is pretty bad. I mean, in the same vein, if that's the argument you want to use, right? Isn't Jinxie being restricted by coordinated attacks bad? Isn't Carlotta being restricted by skill damage bad? Isn't Zhang Liao being restricted by liberation damage bad? You can kind of view these debuffs as literally just like the same thing as like a damage type. I didn't hear very many people complaining at all about there being like resonance skill damage dealers or heavy attack damage dealers or basic attack damage dealers. What happens when you use Camellia without a Sanhua or a Rosia? What happens when you use Camellia without a basic attack buffer? You deal less damage. It's not like these Arrow Erosion or Spectro Frazzle teams are unplayable. They'll just deal less damage.
If someone likes Cartethia, they shouldn't be forced to pull another member for full usage of the kit. Again, I'm speculating Cartethia is going to benefit from fighting enemies with Arrow Erosion. But, you know, if you want to take the speculation out, look at Zani. Right now, Zani is going under a lot of discord.
You guys know that you can actually still use 2 full Nightfalls with Spectro Rover very easily. Yeah, you don't need Phoebe to do a 2 Nightfall rotation. All of that talk about Zani losing moves in her kit, it's kind of like literally misinfo. Yeah, you can just straight up do two Nightfall rotations, which is kind of the basic, right? I think Wallenstein even said you could do 3 with Spectro Rover. And so the whole idea that Zani is losing moves, she actually does it when you use her with Spectro Rover, assuming that you play the team with some swaps. So, yeah, that was actually a significant amount of misinfo.
Because just how reliant she is on Phoebe.
So either Phoebe or Spectro Rover, that's still restrictive. Okay, yeah, show me your Jinxie team without coordinated attacks. Show me what your Jinxie Yang Yang team is doing. Oh, great, okay, so you want to focus on Zani does less attacks. How about Jinxie going ahead and dealing 1/4 of her damage with her laser beam? Jinxie X, Changli, and Zhang Liao. Yeah, so this is the thing. I'm pretty sure they're running Verena in that team, right? I'm pretty sure they're running Verena in this team to come up to have their own coordinated attacks. I'm saying they run Shorekeeper in that team. With Jinxie Changli, I don't think Verena is used. Well, I guess this is the thing. You're playing that team with a giga number of quick swaps, and so Jinxie is still building up a Forte circuit. So much of the field time is being shared with the other unit. So it's like, let's be honest here. The only way that Jinxie Changli is working properly is in the hands of one of the sweatiest players on the planet. I'm talking more like Jinxie Sanhua. Right? Like, you play Jinxie Sanhua, that's not going to be good. That's going to be really bad. Yeah, your Forte is not getting up. But if you're doing a sweaty quick swap team with Jinxie Changli, you can get the Forte up because of how much field time you're getting on Changli in that team. And you can say the same about Zani S Rover working really well with sweaty rotations, so you don't need Peeb guys. Yeah, I mean that's the thing. If you want to use the non-premium option, but still want good damage, you have to play better. Is that a crazy thing? I feel like that even applies to real life. Yeah, if I use the more expensive equipment, I'll get the job done faster. If I use the cheaper equipment, I'll have to work harder or longer to get the job done. I think that even applies to like real life. I think that's a pretty universal concept for people to understand. Yeah, higher quality, more expensive options are typically more effective or save you more time than the cheaper, less expensive ones. Or the cheaper, lower quality ones. Isn't that just like a... Don't you learn that by like age 6 or 7 in real life?
I own Phoebe, but that doesn't mean I want to only use Phoebe when I'm playing Zani. Wuthering Waves was always built on having multiple different teams.
I think the main problem is with Jinxie, you have plenty of options. While with Zani, you have only one option, which you can't use if you use Arrow Erosion team. Guys, Jinxie when she released had very few fucking options. You had Yan Wu or Yinlin when Jinxie first released. And now she has 2 additional 5-star options that are both best in slots. We could just wait. If you're saying Mortiphy was an option for Jinxie, you have to be one of the dumbest players I've ever seen. It's coming from Mystery K98, of course. Yeah, you would have realized that Jinxie's regular mode, Jinxie's enhanced state, doesn't fire off Mortiphy's coordinated attacks. The fact that you even suggested this on her release is one of the most brain-dead things I've ever seen. You use other rotation with Mortiphy. Oh, yeah, surely. Absolutely. That's definitely something people did. Especially when the only other limited DPS in the game was Gion. Right? Because you're totally gonna use the Jinxie Mortifi team when the only other limited DPS in the game was Gion. And so Mortifi is 99% just gonna be on the Gion team. Oh god. A plus suggestion. You live up to your reputation every day, Mystery.
And being able to express your skill through different playstyles. We can have more open-ended teams rather than Spectro Rover being chained to Phoebe, and what is eventually going to be Phoebe's fate when Zani comes out. Second option, make the debuffs more unique.
Some people were playing Yinlin as a main DPS. Yeah, it was probably Mystery. He was probably playing Yinlin as a main DPS with Void Thunder.
All of them, aside from specific ones being DOTs, make it feel like, hey, you're doing this, but just in a different color. I personally would like the elements to 1, be unique, and 2, benefit your team in a way that doesn't require you to have specific characters that have special passive interactions.
We're saying that we don't want mechanics that benefit the team if you have special interactions. Just for special, but that's literally Genshin Impact, where we said the elemental system is good. I guess this is the thing, right? We're going ahead, we're coming in with some of the critiques, but when we use Genshin as an example of a game that did it really well, but then we're making critiques about the WuWa system that are literally applicable to Genshin. I'm not saying it's like a bad critique at all, but I'm just wondering what makes Genshin's version so good, and is WuWa's implementation actually genuinely this bad?
Make the fire debuff cause an AoE explosion, or whenever you
Doesn't it do that?
hit that burst of damage, it fuels your ultimate. Have arrow erosion at a certain number of stacks shred defense, so arrow rover, hey, I won't crash out. I'm good.
I mean, that's just... If you want those to be general baseline effects, this is the problem with that. If you want universal effects like what he's saying, where the electro explosion gives you energy, or all of this stuff has this secondary effect, then every future character released from here on out needs to be balanced around those effects. In my opinion, not centralizing it, not putting universal effects, having the baseline ones be very simple, and then having character kits buff them, or especially interact with them, gives the devs way more breathing room to design kits so that every future arrow character doesn't need to be balanced around arrow erosion. Every future fusion character doesn't need to be balanced around fusion burst, because otherwise, when you start adding in those big universal effects that he's talking about, like regenerating liberation, doing all of that, then you have now added like a limiter for character flexibility in the future.
Anyway, it would allow Arrow Rover to actually have some use and compete with other characters for a team on the spot. Havoc Bane.
Okay, Arrow Rover is undeniably fucking bad, but I think that's mainly due to the fact that they rely on their weapon refinements to work. Currently, at R1, their signature weapon gives a 10% arrow amp. At R5, it gives 30. So it's like they're kind of hampered by the fact they don't have the refinements on their weapon.
Okay, Havoc Bane is pretty sick. That one's good, I won't lie. Electro reduces attack, and it sounds cool, but...
Oh, it's 26, not 30? My bad.
Who knows how effective it'll be, considering most things in endgame is 1 to 3 shotting you. And considering how little Frazzle actually does, I wouldn't be surprised if the number is low for attack reduction. A fix? Make it so that you gain attack as you lower theirs, like some kind of siphoning mechanic. I feel like they could have taken these elements in so many directions, but they just chose to limit themselves. And if they seem OP, then they could just adjust the caps of these debuffs and have them differentiate from each other.
Because they probably don't want to run into the situation of rebalancing every prior Electro team around the universal buff, and they'd rather just release a character. Because the team you're playing right now, the Zhangli Yinlin Shorekeeper team, is currently at this point balanced. And so adding a universal system would mean that it's no longer balanced, or something would have to be done to rebalance it. While simply adding a character that interacts with Electro Flare in a unique way would mean that you don't have to rebalance all these prior teams. And also not rebalance, or also not put a limiter on the future Electro teams that are made.
Arrow erosion reducing defense would definitely make it a high value pick. So make it so that it only does so every 5 stacks up to 15 stacks up to 15%. Or even, like, raise the cap so that, let's say you could get up to a max of 50 stacks, but you only get the defense shred every 25 stacks.
Well, that's the thing, right? You then have to balance that whole arrow erosion defense reduction so that it's not so strong that you end up having to put arrow erosion on every team, and it ends up being objectively the best option. Because you want to know one team or one character that does do that? Yeah, Bennett from Genshin Impact, where his buffs are so ridiculously fucking strong. He's a must pull, a must slot in on like so many teams in the game. And when you run into a situation like Swirl and Viridescent and VV in Genshin Impact, you now have almost a mandatory need to swirl on like every fucking team that deals elemental damage. Because if you don't, your damage fucking falls off a cliff. And that by itself is not really that fun.
Then, abilities that increase the caps of these elements and debuffs suddenly have so much more value and are inherently more useful and less gimmicky. Finally, rebalancing passives surrounding these elements would be greatly appreciated. Listen, I get that they want to sell characters and teams, but it'd be cool if characters could also be self-sufficient. While Phoebe does need Spectral Rover, she's also capable of fueling herself with proper rotation timing between—
This is fucking you. Nobody does this. Nobody does this. This is awful. If you're non-sarcastically starting a confession rotation and then going into absolution, you're just trolling. Nobody does this. Nobody does this unless they're just being disingenuous.
between her absolution and confession mode, which can make
Stop
for
it.
some cool solo runs.
Stop it.
And Kuro, I don't know if you noticed, but people really like soloing holograms.
You wanna know how else you can play around this using Zani? You can just use your enhanced skill 19 times and then you'll have full blaze. You could just do that too.
Check out this video, it's a fun challenge I made for myself. Smiles. I don't want to play a character that needs another character to function. Not their full potential is fine, since this is a game that focuses on team building, but being completely bricked without another character.
Did someone say confession into absolution? Yeah, you could literally see that's what he was doing in the beat. Then again, I forgot. This guy is here to be a comedian for my chat. Maybe his monitor's off, true. Maybe his eyes don't actually work.
Which, by the way, can cost up to $300 or literal months of farming, is a shit feeling. How about instead of giving random damage multipliers, if an enemy is afflicted with a debuff, the Resonator gets flat attack, or crit rate, or crit—
You want to know what you want to do if you don't want to pull a character reliant on debuffs like Zani? You want to know my recommendation if you don't like Zani's design and her reliance on Spectro Frazzle? Just pull one of the other 11 characters available this patch. You have 11 other units you can pull.
damage, or energy regen, or resonant skill damage. That way, the passives feel more like buffs and add-ons instead of key parts of their kit. But those are just my thoughts on a system that we haven't even fully seen yet. So maybe I'll stand corrected and will eat my words. But I still think it's a cool topic to cover. While I wouldn't have minded if the elemental system remained the way it was, I'd appreciate it if they put a little more effort now that they're going in the direction of making it more integrated in the combat.
Brother, man, you're over here. You're showing like this crazy ass Gion gameplay where you're doing like 15k ticks, absolutely fucking up this boss. Think about how the game would have to be rebalanced if Gion is now doing arrow erosion on top of all of this. Like, the game was already complete without the debuffs. And the debuffs are coming in and just giving you a different way to deal the damage. And like, this is the thing, right? When the critique is mainly focused on the implementation of the debuffs, imagine if they had just simply never happened. I don't know if this complaint or this critique would exist. And so, if you just view it as, this is an alternative way to deal arrow damage, this is an alternative way to deal spectral damage, just view Frazzle or erosion as simply like typing. Instead of like basic, heavy, liberation, or skill damage, it's erosion damage or Frazzle damage. And I think that it becomes way less of like a complicated situation where we need to start like universally applying it to past kits and then setting limiters for future kit design in the future. That's my overall take on it. I think he's overcooking this quite a bit.
But what do you guys think?
I don't think his points are necessarily wrong. I think the points that he's given are actually pretty sound, but some of the conclusions and the suggestions built off of those points are like a little bit, I think they're a little bit short-sighted in what the long-term implications would be of them.
Do you guys have the same worries, or do you think I'm overreacting?
I think, again, the points are good, but I do think it's a bit of an overreaction and an understatement of what some of his suggestions would actually lead to.
Do you guys have any suggestions for what they should change or what you'd like to see? Let me know in the comments down below, and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. I upload pretty often, and also don't forget to check out my Twitch. I'm typically streaming WuWa.
Okay, I'll go ahead. I'll give that video a like. I'll actually give it a sub too. Again, I thought that this was actually quite a good video, and the points he raised were actually very valid. However, I think some of the conclusions and the suggestions that he brought forward from that, I don't think that a lot of the long-term implications of what those suggestions would do were really thought out as much as they could be. Because again, the main thing is limiting a future kit design, reworking of original stuff on of original kits on the roster can lead to a lot more trouble than you might think. So that'll be that. Let me know what you all think. Peace.